Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome back to another Saturday Hodgepodge where I kind of catch up on kind of my booktube and book reading week. I guess it's kind of like other people's Friday reads. Apologize for the light if the light is bad. We had a really big storm blow through last night. I intended to record this video on Friday afternoon, but by the time I got home from work, it was dark enough outside already that I didn't think it would make for the best conditions for a video, so I decided to wait till this morning. And then the storm came through last night, and it kept our dogs up. I don't know if I've told this before, but my little dog Ike survived Hurricane Ike, which he's named after, on Galveston Island about 12 years ago. And he has some kind of, trauma embedded into his brain, which makes bad thunderstorms really kind of bad for him. We also had other dog adventures, on Wednesday night. We ordered a pizza, and usually because I have the dogs and they run to the door and bark when somebody rings the doorbell, usually I go out and I intercept the pizza man, or I make sure I'm standing at the door when I think the pizza man is going to show up. But he showed up early on Wednesday night, and the dogs charged at the door, and Zelda, being about 115 pounds now, hit the glass of our front door and shattered our front door, so we had to board up our front door. So now it looks like I live in the local condemned crack house. Anyway, this week in reading, I really got to, I only read 2 books, started a third. As I announced, I think, in last week's video, yeah, I think it was last week's video, this year I want to spend some time reading in genres that I don't normally read. And so I started off by reading a romance, specifically, I believe, a Regency romance, which was Devil's Daughter by Lisa Kleypas, or Kleypas, however you say her last name. I didn't realize when I picked the book up that this is like a book in a series, but to be honest with you, it didn't make much difference to my understanding of the story. So, when I decided to read genre fiction of all different genres, I accepted and knew, of course, because I read genre fiction, that there are certain kind of standard plot lines and tropes and things like that that exist within those genres. And I've never really read a romance novel before. I think this is literally my first. I might have read a Danielle Steele novel when I was in high school for the dirty bits, but I don't remember ever reading a romance novel before. And I guess I was even though I expected it to be full of kind of, well, tropes and, like I said, standardized plot points and kind of stereotypical, cliched things, I was surprised by how many of those things were in this book. And I don't want anything I'm going to say about romance or regional romance to sound overly judgmental. It is what it is, and I will say that for what it is, I think this was really pretty good. The story's interesting, the writing was good. There are things in here that I didn't anticipate, things that feel like they might be new. This plot surrounds a young widowed woman who has 2 young kids, and then of course there's kind of a love triangle situation, which is fairly standard. But every time I thought we were going along and it was just going to be this kind of standard story, there'd be some new things thrown in there and introduced. It's a romance novel, and the hero of the story rescues the heroine of the story, essentially by marrying her, but he rescues her in a kind of an interesting way. I don't know in how many romance novels, because again, this is my first, that the hero rescues the heroine by teaching himself double entry bookkeeping. That's got to be kind of new, I think. So there was some new stuff in here, and like I said, I thought the story was pretty cleverly told, and I thought there were some new things in it. There were some quite charming elements to it, but in the end, it is genre fiction, and there were a lot of just kind of standard things, which I assume are part of the romance genre, maybe part of the Regency romance genre, that stuck out to me. Some mostly harmless, but some just felt a little bit retrograde, maybe a little bit regressive, and maybe I should have turned down my critical reading just a little bit. But some of these things kind of kind of bothered me. So just kind of in some general things, I think that are probably pretty, common harmless things that show up in romance genre. Everybody in the book is beautiful. If you are a character in the book who in any way plays a role, you are attractive, physically attractive in one way or another. That is, if you're interesting and you are essentially a good person. Either interesting or good, you are physically attractive. I thought one of my favorite things to notice about the book was how all the interesting characters have interesting names and how all the boring characters have boring names. The cool kids, the interesting kids, or the interesting people in the novel have names like Phoebe and Pandora and last names like Ravenel, and the boring people have names like Henry and Edward and their last name is Larson. This is essentially a novel in which there's a bad boy character with a heart of gold, or kind of reformed rake, a man who spent his time drinking and carousing his way through his youth, who's now reformed and become serious and hardworking and a good member of his family. So kind of, the bad boy with the heart of gold here shows up as I think a fairly standard thing, and those things that are amusing and kind of fun, and I think part of the fun of reading books like this is those things. There were a couple of things in this though that I thought were surprised me in a novel, and this one's published in 2019. In a novel published in 2019. Now again, I don't have any real experience in the genre, so maybe this is just unusual, but there's some things in there that I thought were kind of, like I said, retrograde. To begin with, there's a lot of mansplaining, where the main hero character explains things either by word or by action to the female character, who is representatives as a person with a strong personality, but who's relatively naive, and whose first husband and she were really in love, but their love was almost like it wasn't asexual, but almost like an asexual friend kind of innocent love. And there's a lot of mansplaining about, how to run an estate and how to judge people. And it just felt like a lot of times the hero is explaining things to the heroine. I found that to be a little bit odd, or to stick out to me and bother a little bit. Also in this book, the main male character opens up the main female character sexually, which is a really old, I think, kind of trope from literature, from romance, that in a sense they are physically attracted, they are attracted to one another, their characters mesh, they're both, very good and similar people, but he kind of, does this thing for her sexually, which makes her, a much more happy, fulfilled human being, and that felt a little bit man-dependent. And then just, the idea of a woman having to be saved by a man from another man or a difficult situation. And maybe that's just romance novels, and maybe those are not things that really should have bothered me. But to a certain extent, I thought to myself, well, this doesn't seem very 21st century to me. And again, it is set in the Regency period, so maybe those are unfair criticisms. And then my last criticism is about the sex. So this would be the only, remotely non-safe for work part of my discussion. So I found the descriptions of sex between the male and female character, the hero or the heroine in this, to be weird, for lack of a better term. They kind of run or dance along the line between incredibly explicit, but also, using flowery, indirect language, particularly for body parts. So, there's a lot of talk about exactly what, in this case, the hero is doing to fulfill his the heroine's sexual needs. He's a giving and attentive lover, but there's a lot of talk about his member and her bud, which just, at some point, you're just like, this is really awkward.
it's descriptive enough to be and frank enough to be titillating, and then there's this horribly, or not horrible, but there's this really kind of awkward use of language, which is somewhat repetitive, that takes place. And I realize that romance novels are fantasy, and they are fun, and they're intended to be fun and things like that. But I just thought that the sex was just a little awkward. Maybe that's me. Maybe I either wanted to be fully explicit or not explicit at all. And it was kind of somewhere in between, and I found that to be a little bit awkward. I don't think Lisa Kleypas or fans of Regency romances would ever suggest that this is serious, profound, deep literature. It's just fun. It's just fantasy, and as such, it's perfectly harmless. I don't think it's for me, but like I said, this was really my first book. I didn't find it to be particularly great, but that's just a matter of taste, not a flaw with the genre or with this author at all, who I think is a pretty good writer with some pretty interesting ideas. Anyway, there you go. I did read a Regency romance book this week, and those were my thoughts on it. Hopefully I didn't offend anybody who's a fan of Kleypas or romance novels, but right now, after just one, I'm not sure this is a genre that I'm going to turn to for relaxation or fun in my reading. The other book I read this month, or this week, was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Hannah from Hannah's Books is kind of hosting a Voxer discussion group and a Toni Morrison read-along. And she's not the only one. I noticed there are other people doing this as well, in which essentially we're reading one Toni Morrison novel every month in the chronological order in which they were published. So The Bluest Eye was Toni Morrison's first novel, and I was just incredibly impressed with the idea that this was someone's first novel, that the command and the power and the confidence and the assuredness of the book were just really impressed me. I don't think I could have been more blown away by the idea that someone wrote this book as their first book. Now, a couple of important things to keep in mind about Toni Morrison. She's a little bit unusual, I think, as a first novelist. I believe she was in her mid-30s when she published The Bluest Eye. And one thing I think a lot of people don't know necessarily about Morrison is that she was an editor at Random House. And had a lot of experience as an editor. And this, by the way, is one of the things that makes her such a remarkable person. Here she is, essentially a single mother who, with the help of her family, was raising her sons. She was an editor, a full-time job, a high-profile editing job. I believe the first African-American female editor at Random House. She edited Angela Davis. She edited Muhammad Ali's autobiography. She did that in the daytime, and then in her spare time, she wrote her own novels. So she's a little bit different probably than most first-time novelists. But again, I was just completely blown away at how kind of fully formed her style was. I think there's some rough edges in this, but how fully formed her style was, how confident she was, how self-assured her sentences are, and how beautiful sometimes the writing is. I want to share most of my specific thoughts about this novel for that discussion group, but I did just want to read one sentence that I thought is a good example of, a Toni Morrison sentence. And near the end of the novel, she's talking about the passage of time and how essentially the narrator of this last section of the novel came to, kind of start ignoring the main character of the novel, and that time passes. And she describes that by saying, and the years folded up like pocket handkerchiefs. And that's it. That simple kind of, but very descriptive sentence, which is, in today's world, out of time. I'm not sure how many people carry pocket handkerchiefs anymore. But just that image of years folding up, or years passing like a folded pocket handkerchief, where, the years get meshed together and they all kind of seem like one piece, and it's hard to distinguish one piece from the other. I just thought it was beautiful, so I've been I enjoyed reading Morrison's The Bluest Eye this week. And then I also started Jeanette Winterson's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. I started reading it last night before it started storming.
I'm about 33 pages in, which is pretty good for me as a slow reader. It's not a very long novel. And so far, I've just been delighted with how funny the book actually is, which is essentially, I think, kind of an autobiographical, fictional discussion or explanation of Jeanette Winterson's childhood so far in a really fundamentalist Christian home. Anyway, there you go. That's my Saturday Hodgepodge for today. Thanks for watching. I look forward to your comments in the comment section below.